At the edge of Cape Town, where the city meets the wild Atlantic Ocean, stands a lighthouse. It rises from a point of land called Green Point, painted white with a bold red stripe around its middle, watching over the dark waters day and night. The lighthouse has stood there since 1824, built of stone strong enough to withstand 200 years of ocean storms. Its light sweeps across the water in a steady rhythm. One flash, pause, two flashes, pause, guiding ships safely past the rocky shore. Attached to the base of the lighthouse is a small stone cottage with white walls and a red door that matches the lighthouse stripe. This is where the keeper lives, tending the light, keeping watch over the sea, living a quiet life at the edge of everything. The keeper's name was Thomas. Thomas was in his 60s, with silver hair and weathered hands, a former ship's captain who had sailed the world's oceans before coming to rest here at Green Point. He had kind eyes, the colour of the sea on a calm day, and a voice made gentle by years of talking to waves and seabirds. He had been keeper of Green Point for 7 years now, and he loved the work. The rhythm of it suited him, checking the light mechanism, polishing the great lens, recording weather patterns in the logbook, watching the ships pass by. Each evening, as the sun set over the ocean, he would climb the spiral stairs to light the beacon, and each morning he would climb up again to extinguish it. It was a solitary life, but Thomas didn't mind solitude. He had the ocean for company, and the ships that passed, and the seals that sometimes hauled themselves onto the rocks below. He had his books, his simple meals, and his telescope for watching stars on clear nights. But lately, Thomas had begun to feel something missing. The cottage felt too quiet in the evenings. The shadows seemed too deep. When he sat by his small fireplace with his dinner and his book, he would find himself listening for sounds that weren't there, footsteps perhaps, or breathing, or the small, comfortable noises of another living presence. He was lonely, though he hadn't quite admitted it to himself yet. That was about to change. It happened on a Tuesday evening in autumn, when the wind was picking up from the southeast and the first hint of rain touched the air. Thomas had just finished his evening rounds, checking the light, recording the barometer reading, and noting the wind direction in the log. He was making his way down the spiral stairs, his boots echoing on the metal steps, when he heard something. A sound from outside the red door. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but Thomas's ears were sharp from years of listening for the sounds that mattered. The change in engine pitch of a struggling ship, the crack of rigging in a storm, the distant boom of a foghorn. This sound was different, smaller, more plaintive. Thomas opened the red door and looked out into the gathering dusk. At first he saw nothing. The path that led from the lighthouse to the city was empty. The grass around the cottage bent in the wind. The ocean beyond was turning dark, its surface beginning to show white caps. Then he looked down. On the doorstep, small and bedraggled, sat a cat. It was grey, not the dark charcoal of city cats or the tabby stripes of house cats, but a soft, silvery grey that reminded Thomas of sea mist on a calm morning. Its fur was damp from the ocean spray, making it look smaller than it probably was. Its ears were laid back slightly, not in aggression, but in the way of a creature that has been travelling a long time and is very, very tired. But it was the cat's eyes that caught Thomas's attention. They were green, not the bright green of grass or leaves, but the deep, mysterious green of the ocean on a clear day, when you can see down into the depths where the light turns everything to jade and emerald. The cat looked up at Thomas, and he could swear he saw something in those eyes, not just the simple need of a hungry animal, but something more profound, understanding perhaps, or recognition. "Hello there," Thomas said softly, crouching down. "Where did you come from?" The cat made a slight sound, not quite a meow, more like a question, and stood up. It swayed slightly, as if exhausted, then sat back down with careful dignity. Thomas looked around. There were no houses nearby, no boats pulled up on the shore. The nearest residential street was a good walk away. How had such a small creature ended up here at the very edge of the land? "Are you lost?" he asked. The cat tilted its head as if considering the question. Then it stood again and took one careful step forward, over the threshold into the cottage. Thomas smiled. "I suppose that answers that. Come on then, let's get you warm and fed." He stepped back to let the cat enter. It walked in with quiet grace, its tail held high despite its apparent weariness, and looked around the cottage with those remarkable green eyes. Thomas closed the door against the rising wind. Thomas's cottage was simple but comfortable. There was one main room that served as kitchen, dining area and sitting room, with a small fireplace set into the stone wall. A doorway led to his bedroom, and a ladder in the corner gave access to a tiny loft where he stored supplies. The walls were painted white, hung with a few old maritime charts and a painting of a ship under sail. A worn armchair sat near the fireplace, with a small table beside it holding a lamp, a book, and Thomas's reading glasses. The kitchen area was equally modest: a stove, a sink, shelves holding dishes and dry goods, and a small refrigerator. But tonight, with the cat padding softly across the wooden floor, exploring with careful curiosity, the cottage suddenly felt less empty, less like a place where a solitary man marked time between tides, and more like a home. "Now then," Thomas said, moving to the kitchen. "I don't have cat food, I'm afraid. But I have some tinned fish. Would that do?" The cat, who had been inspecting the armchair, turned to look at him and made that slight questioning sound again. "I'll take that as a yes." He opened a tin of sardines, drained off the oil, and placed the fish on a small plate which he set on the floor near the fireplace. Then he filled a bowl with water and placed it beside the plate. The cat approached cautiously, sniffed the fish, then began to eat with delicate, precise bites. Not the frantic gobbling of a starving animal, but the careful eating of a creature who had learned to savour what was offered. Thomas watched for a moment, then set about making his own dinner, a simple soup, bread and cheese. He lit the fire, and soon the cottage was warm and bright, the wind outside seeming very far away. After the cat had finished eating and drinking, it sat by the fire. It began to groom itself, licking the dampness from its silvery fur with methodical attention. Thomas sat in his armchair with his soup, watching, feeling something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "You need a name," he said thoughtfully. The cat paused in its grooming and looked at him. "You're the colour of sea mist," Thomas continued, "and you appeared out of nowhere like mist rolling in. How about mist? Would you answer to that?" The cat regarded him steadily for a long moment, then made a soft sound, almost like approval, and returned to grooming. "Mist it is then," Thomas said, smiling. And just like that, neither of them was alone anymore. That first night, Thomas gave Mist an old blanket folded near the fireplace, thinking the cat would sleep there in the warmth. But when he woke in the darkness of early morning, his internal clock always woke him before dawn, time to check the light. He found Mist curled at the foot of his bed, a warm weight through the covers. He smiled and carefully got up without disturbing the sleeping cat. He pulled on his thick sweater and boots, then climbed the spiral stairs to the light chamber. The great lens still turned slowly on its mechanism, powered by clockwork that Thomas wound each day. The light itself, a powerful lamp in the centre of the lens, was still burning, but dawn was approaching, turning the eastern sky from black to deep blue. Thomas extinguished the lamp, made his notes in the logbook, then stood for a moment at the window, looking out at the ocean. The water was calm this morning, reflecting the slowly brightening sky. A few early fishing boats were heading out, their lights still on, small constellations moving across the dark water. In the distance, Table Mountain rose against the sky, its flat top beginning to catch the first light. Thomas loved this time of day, the quiet moment between night and morning when the world held its breath. He heard a soft sound behind him and turned to find Miss sitting at the top of the stairs, having climbed up silently on velvet paws. "Couldn't sleep either?" Thomas asked. Mist walked over to the window and stood on hind legs, front paws on the sill, looking out at the ocean. In the growing light, Thomas could see the cat more clearly now. The silver-grey fur was clean and dry, revealing itself to be quite beautiful, soft and thick. The green eyes reflected the ocean's colour. And then something remarkable happened. As Mist looked out at the water, the cat's fur seemed to shimmer slightly, catching the early light in a way that reminded Thomas of sun on water, of the way mist itself catches and holds light, making it visible. Thomas blinked, wondering if he was seeing things, but no, there it was again, a subtle glow around the cat's outline, like silver light traced along every hair. Mist turned to look at him, and for a moment Thomas felt a strange sensation, as if the cat could see right through him, down to the lonely places he didn't talk about, the parts of himself he'd put away when he'd stopped sailing and come to live at the lighthouse. Then Mist made that soft questioning sound, and the moment passed. The shimmer faded, leaving just a cat, remarkable but just a cat, looking at him with those intelligent green eyes. Thomas shook his head slightly, smiling at himself. "Too many hours alone, that's all," he muttered, starting to see things. But deep down, he wondered. Over the following days, Mist settled into the cottage as if the cat had always lived there. A routine developed, gentle and natural. Each morning, Mist would accompany Thomas up the spiral stairs to extinguish the light. The cat would sit on the windowsill while Thomas worked, watching the ocean as the sun rose, that silver shimmer occasionally visible in the early light. During the day, Mist would explore the lighthouse grounds, disappearing for hours at a time. Thomas would see the cat prowling along the rocks, watching the waves, or sitting very still while seabirds wheeled overhead. Once he saw Mist seated on the edge of the water, front paws just touching the foam, as if testing the ocean's temperature or perhaps having a conversation with it. But Mist always returned by afternoon, usually bringing something: a piece of driftwood, a smooth stone, a feather, a shell. The cat would place these offerings by the red door, like gifts, and Thomas would add them to a growing collection on the windowsill inside. In the evenings they would sit together by the fire. Thomas would read maritime history, poetry, old navigation manuals, while Mist dozed on the hearth or sat in the window watching the darkening ocean. Sometimes the cat would jump into Thomas's lap and settle there with a deep, rumbling purr that vibrated through them both. And each evening, as the sun set, they would climb the stairs together to light the beacon. Mist seemed to understand the importance of this ritual, sitting quietly while Thomas went through his careful routine, checking the mechanism, filling the lamp with oil, adjusting the wicks, finally striking the match that would send the light sweeping out across the darkening water. Thomas found himself talking to Mist during these evening rituals, pointing out ships, describing the weather patterns and sharing stories from his sailing days. The cat would listen with apparent interest, those green eyes watching him, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed like responses. "You're a good listener," Thomas told the cat one evening as they watched a cargo ship pass by, its running lights bright against the dusk. Better than most people, truth be told. Mist looked at him and for just a moment seemed to smile. 10 days after Mist's arrival, a storm came. Thomas had been watching it build all day, the barometer dropping steadily, the wind shifting to the northwest, bringing heavy clouds that piled up over the ocean like great dark mountains. By afternoon the sea had turned from its usual blue-green to a deep, angry grey, its surface beginning to show white streaks of foam. "Going to be a rough one," Thomas said to Mist as he prepared the lighthouse. He checked the light mechanism twice, made sure there was plenty of fuel, secured the shutters on the cottage windows and brought in extra firewood. Mist followed him on his rounds, seeming more alert than usual, as if the cat could sense what was coming. The storm hit at dusk. It came fast and hard, the wind rising from a stiff breeze to a howling gale in the space of an hour. Rain lashed the lighthouse in horizontal sheets. The ocean transformed into a churning mass of white and grey, waves crashing against the rocks with a sound like thunder. Thomas lit the beacon early and stood at the window of the light chamber watching. This was what the lighthouse was for. This moment, these conditions, when ships needed guidance most desperately. The light swept out into the storm, cutting through the rain and spray, a steady beacon in the chaos. Mist sat beside him, perfectly calm despite the storm raging around them. The cat's eyes reflected the sweeping light, turning from green to gold and back again with each rotation. Hours passed. The storm grew worse, if anything. Thomas stayed at his post, watching for ships, ready to respond if anyone needed help. The wind screamed around the lighthouse, making the whole structure vibrate slightly, but the old stone held firm, as it had held for 200 years. Around midnight, Thomas saw lights through the rain, a ship fighting its way through the storm. He watched it carefully, marking its position, ready to call the Coast Guard if it looked like the vessel was in trouble. The ship was struggling, that much was clear. It was being pushed toward the rocks by wind and current, its engines fighting to maintain position. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He'd seen ships go down in storms like this, had sailed through some himself in his younger days. "Come on," he whispered to the distant ship. "You can make it." Follow the light. And then something extraordinary happened. Mist stood up on the windowsill and looked out at the struggling ship. The cat's fur began to shimmer with that silver light Thomas had seen before, but brighter now, much brighter, until the whole cat seemed to glow like a small star. Thomas stared, unable to believe what he was seeing. Mist raised one paw and placed it against the glass, as if touching the storm itself. And in that moment Thomas felt something change in the air, a shift, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment when wind changes direction or when fog begins to lift. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, and it seemed to Thomas that it burned brighter than usual, cutting through the storm with unusual clarity. The light touched the struggling ship, and he could have sworn he saw the vessel respond, its course steadying, finding the strength to push through. Slowly, fighting every foot of the way, the ship made it past the rocks and into safer water. Thomas watched it go, his heart still pounding, until its lights disappeared into the storm. He turned to Mist. The silver glow was fading now, the cat returning to normal appearance, but those green eyes looked at him with unmistakable awareness. "You're not just a cat, are you?" Thomas asked softly. Mist made that soft questioning sound, but this time Thomas thought he heard something in it, an acknowledgement, a yes. He sat down slowly on the floor of the light chamber, the storm still raging outside, and Mist came to him, pressing against his side with warm, solid presence. "Whatever you are," Thomas said, stroking the soft fur, "thank you. Thank you for being here." They sat together through the rest of the storm, keeper and cat, while the light swept steadily across the wild water, guiding ship safely home. In the days after the storm, Thomas didn't speak directly about what he'd seen. It felt like something that shouldn't be examined too closely, like a dream that would fade if you tried to hold it too tightly. But he understood now that Mist was something more than an ordinary cat, a lighthouse spirit perhaps, or an ocean guardian in feline form, or simply a bit of magic that had washed up with the tide and decided to stay. It didn't really matter what Mist was, Thomas decided. What mattered was the companionship. The quiet presence, the sense that the lighthouse and he himself were being watched over by something kind. The days took on a new quality. Thomas still performed his duties with the same careful attention, but now there was joy in them. Someone to share the dawn with, someone to talk to during the long evenings, someone who understood the importance of the light. Sometimes, on very clear nights, Thomas would climb to the light chamber with his telescope, and Mist would join him. They would look at the stars together, or watch the lights of Cape Town spreading up the mountain slopes, or follow the path of ships crossing the dark water. On these nights, Mist would sometimes glow with that soft silver light, just faintly, like moonlight on mist itself. And Thomas would feel a deep peace settle over him, the peace of knowing he was precisely where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. He was no longer lonely. The cottage no longer felt empty. And when he climbed the stairs each evening to light the beacon, he did so with a lighter heart, knowing that Mist would be there beside him, helping to keep the light burning, watching over the ships that passed in the night. And so the weeks turned into months, and autumn became winter at Green Point. The lighthouse stood as it had always stood, white and red against the sky, its light sweeping faithfully across the water. Ships passed safely by, guided through fog and storm, through clear nights and cloudy days. Inside the small stone cottage, Thomas and Mist lived their quiet life at the edge of the ocean. Each dawn they climbed the spiral stairs together. Each evening they lit the beacon together. Each night they sat by the fire, Thomas with his books, and Mist with that deep, rumbling purr. The collection of gifts on the windowsill grew, shells and stones, feathers and sea glass, bits of driftwood worn smooth by waves. Each one was a reminder that magic existed if you knew where to look for it. Sometimes, late at night when the city slept and only the lighthouse was awake, Thomas would stand at the window and watch Mist prowling the rocks below, the cat's silver fur catching starlight, moving through the darkness like living mist itself. And he would smile, this old captain who had sailed the world's oceans only to find his true home at the edge of the land, keeping watch over the water with a magical cat for company. The light swept across the dark ocean, steady and sure. One flash, pause, two flashes, pause, guiding ships safely home night after night, while the keeper and his lighthouse cat watched over them all. As night deepens over Cape Town, the city lights begin to glow against the mountain. The ocean rolls endlessly against the shore, and at Green Point the lighthouse stands faithful, its beam sweeping across the water. In the small cottage, an old keeper sits by his fire with a grey cat curled beside him. Tomorrow there will be ships to watch for, weather to record, and the light to tend. But tonight, in this perfect moment, there is only warmth and companionship, peace and purpose. The lighthouse will keep its watch through the darkness. The ocean will sing its ancient song, and in the morning the keeper and the cat will climb the spiral stairs together to greet the dawn. Sleep well, dear traveller. May your dreams be as calm as a quiet sea, as steady as a lighthouse beam. The light keeps watch over you tonight, until the next tide brings another story.